Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. As always, just do a little bit of quick housekeeping. If you do like the show, please take a second to check out Patreon. It's patreon.com/Nordic Mythology podcast. And there is a ton of bonus episodes on there that you can check out. There's years of backdated episodes and all the ones going forward. It starts from £3 a month, which works out about 10p a day. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say on it this week, because I'm really excited to get into this episode. So if you can go check out the Patreon, please do. It's how we keep the lights on. And then if not, leave a 5-star rating, positive review wherever you get the podcast. But other than that, first I'm going to introduce my new co-host, I guess. This is it's an awkward one. The new co-host and in-house archaeologist, as she demanded to be called.
Jesus Christ.
Margrethe Havgar. Margrethe, welcome.
Hello.
And then, I guess, as a guest, the lovely Dr. Mathias Nordvig.
Hello.
Oh, that voice. Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
How are you? How's life?
I'm good. Yeah. It's just making things work and getting like sucked into a million different projects.
Mm-hmm. You seem to be writing a new book every week.
Pretty much, yes. I got a couple in the pipeline. The most recent one was the that's an academic book, The Ancestral North, where we're actually talking about like Heilung and Vadrona. I wrote it with Ross Hagen, who's an ethnomusicologist at the Utah Valley University. We had a lot of fun going to concerts for about 2 years, and then we sat down and wrote that book.
What a lovely way to get yourself to concerts.
Right?
I see what you're doing there.
I mean, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Right? Yeah, you gotta work the system.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. So I think we spoke about maybe doing an episode on that.
Yeah, we could probably talk about that at some point later on.
Sounds mildly relevant.
Yeah. It would be. Yeah, I think so.
I mean,
that was a joke. It sounds very incredibly relevant.
I got it. And we should have Ross on as well for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could definitely go and watch some music as well if there's any excuse. we can get us there. But yeah, let's get into today's show, because it wasn't that long ago that me and Mags did an episode on Asatru, and we got a little bit of feedback on it, not tons, but I think we probably rushed into the episode. What do you think, Margrethe?
Well, I wouldn't say we probably rushed into it. I'd say we were completely aware that we were absolutely rushing into it, and it was an off-the-cuff kind of thing, and we went with it. And you enjoyed yourself conversing with me, being extremely uncomfortable for an hour and a half, having opinions about things that I was like, I have not done enough research on this, but I'll try.
Yeah, so it was born out of a frustration of people like claiming that the Asatru is like the Viking religion. That's kind of where the kernel that started us to decide we were going to do that.
Yeah, I think it was more kind of just an annoyance with I'm going to come off as sounding like such an asshat academic, but like the lack of nuance in the vernacular, and then also through just having all of these connotations that just snowballs into all of these things, whereas then not necessarily just an academic, but as a person who works with and knows a lot about this kind of stuff, it just gets really tedious.
Oh, you should hear my rant about Norse then.
Oh yeah,
I'm super excited. Can we do an episode on that?
Oh sure.
Oh yeah, that was a running joke for a long. I still refuse to use the word Norse because of that. And you know what's so annoying is that Norse is by far a better word when it comes to business acumen. When it's
yes, of course.
SEO and putting it in things, Norse is like a trigger word, and I still struggle using it. Every time I use it, I've got like Matthias on my shoulder being like, "No, Dan."
No, but genuinely, can I have like a teaser? Because are we just talking about the independent term Norse or Old Norse as well, or what do we?
Well, we are talking about the general popular and sometimes also academic use of the word Norse, right? It originally comes into English from Dano-Norwegian, describes a Norwegian person, and that's in the 1580s. And then it, nowadays it's applied to anything Scandinavian, and the term Old Norse is applied to anything Viking Age. And this
Sure.
is wrong nomenclature because Old Norse didn't exist in the Viking Age. But as I said, it's a rant. So
no, but I would just like it to no, but genuinely I was very curious about it because I'm struggling with not going off on too long of a tangent here, but I was genuinely curious because I'm now just with the terminology of me putting together my thesis. I don't like well, I have issues with the term Viking Age just because it's so cemented, but I also don't, that's not what my thesis is about. So I don't want to go too into that. And pre-Christian Scandinavia gets really heavy and not very specific. And I'm like, but should I use Old Norse then? That is the kind of the academic tradition. But yeah, so that's why. That was the background for my question.
Well, if it's anything before 1100, you don't want to use the term Old Norse.
So not using Old Norse then. Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean,
that's all I needed.
Despite how heavy pre-Christian is, I think that is the best term when we're talking pre-conversion, especially in material culture.
Yeah.
But, it also carries some issues and problems. When we talk language, for Viking Age, I want to use the term common Scandinavian or common Nordic for the language itself, because that's what it is. Old Norse is a linguistic development that happens in the 1100s in the North Atlantic, where you then see the languages branching out from each other. So that's where that would be appropriate. But yeah, this is
cool.
Let's rein it back in and talk about Asatru.
No, but at the same time, I feel like it's an adjacent thing, right? Because it kind of it leads to the same annoyance, if you will.
Well, yeah, I mean, annoyance, but also just like problematic conceptions about the past, right? If we talk about using the term Asatru, 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 as we say in Danish, I mean, that terminology is incredibly problematic for the pre-Christian era. And I completely understand your frustration too. We see this the same thing in Danish, where Asatru is like the religion of the Vikings, and no, it's not. It's a modern development. It's neo-paganism. And so it doesn't have any relationship with the pre-Christian past, other than modern people using it, right?
Yeah,
using elements of the pre-Christian past. So it's really problematic. And if you look at it from like a public dissemination perspective, when you find the term Asatru in like museums, somebody done fucked up, to be honest. Like that's far out. It should be the pre-Christian religion, or the religion in the Viking Age, or something like that instead.
Yeah, even just talking about religion as a concept in the Viking Age, I can get really I can be a busybody about the conversation.
Well, yeah, I mean religion also carries connotations in various ways in the scholarship of religion, science of religion, history of religion. We have sorted that out. So we use the term religion, and we tend to know what everybody means, but that's not necessarily what lay people understand. It's like when you use the term
that's what
religion,
I was talking about. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, you're good. Like for instance, here in America, when you use the term religion, a lot of people think, oh, that's some kind of like church, and then they think about like spirit, like neo-paganism. They connect with like spirituality or something like that. So that carries its own context here, which I wouldn't say is present in the same way in Europe, but sometimes also does show its face here and there.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess we already started. So I was going to say that we in the previous one, we probably, I said to Mathias before, we probably bounced around and never really got to saying maybe what we wanted to say. We kind of skirted the edges a lot.
Well, personally, I've listened to the episode twice now just because I just blacked out after it. I was like, I don't know what I said. I don't know. I felt kind of happy with it, but yeah, sure. We did skirt around, but I was very happy with what we did because we skirted around stuff. Because I was like, I do not have enough info on this to be able to be more specific about anything. And I also have, with the lack of information and knowledge that I have on this topic, I also have no need to come out with heavy hitting opinions that genuinely can be felt as hurtful to active practitioners of different neo-pagan traditions.
I think that was the criticism that I saw was based around us spending too much time discussing white supremacy. And I don't know whether, because I think we quite clearly said that, you know, there's a difference, and that they're not linked. But I think because we spoke about it in length, that there may have been some people who are Asatru that maybe got upset, and because
I can understand that though. I can.
next to each other. And I think that may be where some of the negativity came from that
100%.
episode.
I totally get that. But yeah, we definitely did skirt around, and I understand that that could have been frustrating.
Yeah, but people are like the heads on the chopping block, don't they, Mathias?
Yeah, they do. Oh, yeah. Never know when you're gonna get canceled, my friend.
I know we tried hard, but thankfully it never happened.
Yeah. Well, it did for me. But that's a different matter. Okay, so
Anywho.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
A couple of things. Well, first and foremost, I think, you know, it's important to get some stats on all of this, right? When we talk about like Asatru, neo-paganism, Norse paganism, heathenry, whatever, you know, nomenclature people apply. The biggest organizations that you get pretty much anywhere in the Western world are very explicitly anti-racist and inclusive, right? So, like the organization, I don't know the status of this organization any longer, but a couple of years back I talked to a member of it, the Asatru community here in the US. They told me that they have over 5,000 members, and that's you know, a lot more than I know that the organizations that otherwise affiliate with white supremacy here in the US have. And I'm pretty sure that's the case in the rest of the world generally, that these like primary organizations where people who consider themselves Asatru or Norse pagans, they congregate, they have that general anti-racist expression. So that's important to keep in mind. And you know, then you can ask yourself, well, how many are there out there when you know, count all the groups and all their members and all that stuff? And we don't have any good census on any of that really for any country. The best places to get a census are actually Scandinavia, because that's where, you know, there's a head count for the organizations, because and that goes into like governmental some kind of governmental list, I guess, because of, you know, the way that things work in those places, right? And again, what we see is that the largest organizations are fairly anti-racist or non-racist, or have some kind of inclusive messaging going on. The from what I know, actually, my home country might be the worst place when it comes to that, where there's too much ambiguity in the organization Fornsider. You hear that, guys? Over there in Denmark, there's too much ambiguity. So that would be sort of like a general look at the organization, right? So, but then, you know, when we look at the origin of these modern thing that we call Asatru, it does have its origin in distinctly racist ideas and organizations and groups, right? If we go back to the late 19th century when this neo-pagan trend emerges, and that, by the way, goes for pretty much anything neo-pagan and also anything New Age. It's
I am
not just
deeply, thoroughly shocked, she said sarcastically.
yeah. So what happens in the late 19th century is you have a new development in public religion and spirituality across Europe and North America. And this ties very well, in quotation marks, in with political trends that, align with ideas around eugenics and racism, right? That's the big thing at the time. And so you get that combination of spiritual revivalism and these racist expressions. That, of course, it becomes very unpopular after and during and after World War II. And then you have a new development after that, where you have sort of a more left-leaning expression in many ways. But keep in mind that the primary organizations that were created after World War II for Asatru specifically still carried the racist messaging in some capacity. We're talking about Odinists in particular here. But then, through the 70s and 80s and 90s, there are new developments. In the 90s, there's a big split between, believers or in-believers in general, where we see the terms folkish and universalist becoming sort of like primary ideas attached to Asatru. So you can be folkish Asatru and you can be universalist Asatru. Now, folkish is derived from the racists back in the late 19th century and early 20th century, völkisch in German. And that's, racialists, people who believe this has something to do with being white and all that nonsense. And then universalists are then the other group that emerges as an inclusive group. And I think that term has been largely abandoned. I mean, it's still in use, but people don't really identify as like universalist Asatru or something like that. So so we have two strands when it comes to politics in that regard, or affiliation with politics. And they have over time become more and more cemented, sort of like, taken shape and materialized as very concrete factions, so to speak, often butting heads with one another. And then, what you see, what I would say that is happening or has been happening over the last 10 years is a consolidation within the right wing and a bit more of a sprawl in the left wing when it comes to Asatru.
How do you mean?
Well, the right wing, those who associate with the term folkish, they don't seem to disagree too much with one another. Groups and individual leaders, whereas like in the universalist left-leaning camp, whatever you want to call that, I don't like the term left-leaning, because you don't have to be left-wing to be anti-racist. Keep that in mind, everybody.
Important distinction.
It is an important distinction, but one that that is increasingly fading today. Well, in that group, what you have are different individuals, leaders, or groups emerging with different levels of messaging when it comes to the notion of inclusivity, for instance. And so you get competition within these groups, or between the groups, or between these individual leaders. That's something that we're seeing here in the US in particular.
Yes.
Huh.
Do you have something to say, Max?
No, it's just my immediate thought was that it kind of, I know you said right leaning and left leaning is kind of a misnomer in a way, but at the same time, that development did seem quite familiar in what's happening in the political landscape, especially in the US as well,
Oh,
where
of
you
course.
have this weird consolidation on the right side. Again, you don't have to be left-leaning to be anti-racist, but then on the grand political spectrum, there's this weird consolidation on the right side while the left seems to be fracturing or at least sprawling a bit more.
Yeah, yeah. No, these things mirror larger, political developments, either quite closely or just in some capacity. It really depends on who we're looking at and when and where in time.
Sure.
And I'd say that that's the same thing in Europe.
Absolutely.
And you get different attitudes in different organizations, as I said. Some organizations focus more on some kind of unity based on beliefs. Others focus more on unity based on politics, if that makes sense, right? Like, so there are some who try to sort of distinguish between what we as practitioners do and believe in, and that's what we should focus on. And there are others that will then say, well, there needs to be a hard line between political groupings.
Do you see this two factions in Europe as well, or is it mainly just?
Oh, it's definitely there in Europe. It's definitely there in many different ways. Everything is, of course, always particular to the country and location that you're talking about. But again, in the broad scope of things, pretty much mirroring the developments that we're seeing here in the US and worldwide, and when it comes to factions based on politics. But now I think we've cleared out the political aspect of it. So shall we get into what is it actually?
Yes. I love what is it actually sections.
It does feel as though you can't separate Asatru from some sort of race talk or.
Well, my friend, you can't separate Christianity from that either.
Oh yeah,
No.
absolutely.
But I mean, the problem
it's like
is
no, sorry, go.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's like if you can do the same thing with academia. Me as an archaeologist, I can't ever divorce archaeology from the fact that it is ultimately an imperialist based field.
Yeah, and it's the same with literature studies, for that matter, right? Like language and literature has been the core of building nationalism across the board for 2 centuries plus at this point, right? So no, it's we can't separate any of these issues really from things like race and racism and colonialism and such. But I'd say this though, there is a tendency to think of Asatru and neo-paganisms of various kinds as more associated with ideas of racism and race and all that kind of stuff. Like a great example of this is the January 6th insurrection here in the US in 2021, where that ridiculous dumbass Jake Chansey was like dressed in horns and pelts and had like Nordic tattoos, and everybody was looking at this guy. Everybody was taking pictures of him. He was all over covers everywhere, right? Newspaper covers and so on, and people loved it because he looked pagan, right? And he looked quote unquote barbarian, and that's really what it is, right? It's the idea
he had the
of
horns
this,
as well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he had the horns.
And let's just keep in mind that when he actually got up on the rostrum in the Senate floor, he held a prayer to the Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. Okay, like dude's a Christian, but everybody likes this pagan expression of him, and so we're looking at him, not looking at all the Jesus saves flags that were outside around the Capitol.
So of course not, because that wouldn't fit the narrative that we're trying to make.
No, exactly right.
Yeah,
the narrative is that Christianity represents something civilized, whereas paganism represents something barbarian, right?
Yeah, you still have that. You still get that notion from people who of pagan being weird, different, and satanic. There's that link, isn't there, all the time between it's just the other that people don't understand, so it's automatically just a bit strange.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big problem. It's not just a big problem in, media discourse in public. It's also a problem in how politicians perceive these issues. And it's also a problem in how academics perceive these issues, because academics typically fall in line with um, the majority that perceive themselves as like civilized and so on, right? So they look at this outre phenomenon and they're like, what is this? These people look barbarian, right? And so you, that also means then that it's actually difficult, or it can be difficult, to find good scholarship on neo-paganism, because there's a tendency of scholars to perceive it as something ridiculous at best, and at worst something that's like always subcommunicating something racist.
I heard there's a really good book on Asatru.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What's it called
Enlighten
again?
the audience.
What's it called again, Mathias?
Is it maybe Asatru for beginners?
I thought I had one on the shelf, but I
By whom, might I ask?
I don't know.
Don't go shy now.
I think it's definitely the dude with the cap that's blushing in the corner over there.
Yeah.
No, it is a great book. People do definitely buy that. It's a great way into, as it says, for beginners. But so
Yeah.
let's take that route, and then let's go kind of back to what we were gonna is what is Asatru, and is it even possible to say what it is? Because it feels like it's, from what you've said so far, that it took these two wildly different directions. So is it even possible to say this is what it is in one kind of umbrella term, or do they both need their own?
Well, and I don't think they do. So first and foremost, I mean, what can we boil down Asatru and Norse paganism or modern heathenry down to? Well, it's a modern belief, spirituality, religious practice, however you want to define that or call it, that is based on reference to the pre-Christian past in Scandinavia and Northern Europe. That's sort of like the cut of it. That's what it is. Modern people who look back into history, and then based on their knowledge level and skill and so on, extract whatever they can and apply it in a contemporary way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so that means that there, it doesn't really matter how they affiliate politically. If that's what they're doing, then that's what they're doing. Then what they do then is interpret what they're doing in a specific context of today that makes sense to them, right? And this has been going on for, as I mentioned, for at least 150 years ish at this point, more or less, right? Because we're in 2024, and people start musing about this stuff in the middle of the 19th century, and then it becomes more and more after that. And this was in the 19th century. People also started musing about like witchcraft and Egyptian religion and Mesopotamian religion, Eastern religions, Indian religion, and so on, right? So it's not just an isolated phenomenon. The Nordic stuff is a branch in this general New Age tree that goes parallel with all the other ones, right? And then you have different people, individuals who become who become those who set the tone for what happens decades after, right? In the 19th century, it's a figure like Guido von List. I'm saying von in quotation marks because that's a aristocratic title of distinction in Austrian German at the time, and It's still debated whether or not he was actually an aristocrat. But he liked to think of himself as an aristocrat.
Starts to paint a picture.
Right, exactly, to paint a picture here. So he was very active in cultural politics in the Austrian kingdom at the time, and very close to various political individuals, people who became very decisive in politics in the early 20th century. Among other, the mayor of Vienna, whom Hitler thought of as a super guy. That could tell you a little bit about what kind of political landscape we're in, right?
Super guy. What a great phrase.
Right.
Just a super guy.
He's a super guy. And that, that particular political context and cultural context that Guido is doing his things in is all centered around Austrian nationalism and German nationalism and anti-Slavic, anti-Catholic, anti-Italian, anti-Hungarian sentiments of various kinds, because it's a multicultural kingdom. And so he becomes very decisive in the type of paganism that emerges from that. And this is where we get these Völkisch movements that are centered around the idea of a religion that connects to their folk, their spirit, the spirit of the folk, right? And so we get the Thule Society, we get other like Germanic orders, whatever they're called, in the German-speaking area in general in the early 20th century. And then after that, right, we have a rethinking of culture and politics after World War II, where new ideas emerge and people change their minds on a lot of different things. Keep in mind that, all the stuff that we blame Nazis for, and we're like, oh, they're bad because of that. That's something that pretty much everybody from Europe were doing at the time in different capacities or thinking, right? Like concentration camps were also a British thing. Genocides were also a British thing. Oh, I'm gonna be busting your balls, my friend.
Also, us Scandinavians, especially Norwegians and Swedes, we are not exempt from this.
Exactly. You have a lot of these things happening in Scandinavia. Denmark was the first country to actually enact a law on eugenics. That's my home country, right? So you can go through the archives of all of these countries, and you can see, oh, wait a minute, you guys did a lot of Nazi stuff yourselves. And when it comes to America, where I'm sitting, the race laws that the Nazis enacted in Nuremberg were very heavily inspired by American race laws. So this was a thing in pre-World War II Western societies in general. And what happened then was, of course, that people changed their mind after they had a big war about it. And so you also get new ideas within paganisms, right? So you get Wicca starts already before before we reach 1945, but Wicca is sort of a more quote unquote liberal type of paganism that emerges in the 1930s and 40s. There's one strand that goes in one direction. Then you get these, as I said, these Asatru Norse pagan communities as well that take on a lot of the more liberal flavors of the 1960s and 70s and so on, right? So, as we talked about before, the attitudes and ideas, the interpretations of the pre-Christian past, of course, follow cultural and political trends that are present with us now, right? And
it's almost like we're a part of the time that we live in.
That is weird. That is almost correct, right? Like we're there.
Fancy
so
that.
but then when we look at such things as rituals, right? What we can see is that the types of rituals that most pagan groups, and I'm speaking more broadly now, groups that associate not just with Nordic stuff, but the Wicca traditions, the revival traditions of other types of religion, Slavic and such, Celtic. If they don't have any solid literature that can really help them build out rituals. What they're actually doing is that they're copying what scholars of religion thought was the basic way of being pagan in the 19th century. So, winter and summer solstices are like a big thing in a lot of pagan communities. And that is based off of the 19th century idea that if you weren't Christian back in the day, then you worshiped the sun. So, there's a lot that still goes back to that 19th century situation, right? When we look at the source material for rituals in the Scandinavian context, the Nordic context in general, the sagas, Snorri Sturluson's Edda, the Poetic Edda, and those texts that we have, well, we have a big problem because any scholar of literature in this field knows that all of this stuff is written after people actually practice this religion. So the question is always, well, how much of it is just like free imagination, invention, or something that comes from another cultural source than the Nordic source? And this is where we get a lot of cool descriptions in the sagas about like bloody rituals, sacrificing animals, and that kind of stuff. And they did do animal sacrifices, that's for sure. But the question is that relevant for people today? So you have discussions like that as well within Asatru and Norse paganism, right? Is that something that we should be doing? Why should we be doing it? Should we be doing it just because there are some texts that say that we should be doing it? What's the point of that? So there's a lot of discussion in that regard. And that, of course, all boils down to where some things don't align, I guess, and that would be that there's not necessarily a common idea of like a cosmos, if that makes sense. Like cosmos as like in this is what it looks like for us pagans, right? We're like it's more of well, there's this source that says this and there's this source that says this. We can place these things within that cosmos in different ways. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does to me. No, it doesn't to you. Okay, well, I guess you're gonna go make a group over there and I'm gonna make a group over here, right? That's the thing that we see a lot too in these groups. Like you constantly have like a new group spawning everywhere. Based
is
off
that
of
any different to the main religions? I feel like there's tons of different flavors of Christianity.
Sure. Yeah, it is. It is quite similar in many respects compared to other religions. But what's lacking from the neo-pagan context is a deep tradition, right? With Christianity, people can refer to a 2,000-year-old history, right? With Islam, 1,300 roughly, I think it is, if I do my math right, year history. Judaism, even older, right?
Yeah, so not
2,500 at least.
not just the sources that the practices are based on, but also how people have actually practiced for that time span. Well, in the other case, we're both lacking definite contemporaneous sources, and also there's a big gap between when whatever was practiced was last practiced and now.
Yeah, at that, and then also a general tendency to not really perceive anybody but yourself as an authority on something when it comes to pagan stuff, right? Like sure, there are people who become cult leaders and gurus and so on, but there are strong strands of anti-authoritarianism or anti-authority in the pagan communities across the board, I would say. There's a general tendency to kill your idols essentially as well, like the
Metaphorically, I assume.
yeah.
No, I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry.
Like a good example of that is the Troth, a large organization here in the US, just had a major issue with one of their primary figureheads, who got themselves into a lot of trouble, it seems, and was booted from the organization.
Is that okay? Is it Diana Paxman?
Paxson, yes, yeah.
Paxson, did I see that right? Yeah, I've never read any of her books, but I see her book recommended. Matthias, this is not going to surprise you, but I've not stopped frequenting the Facebook groups.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our weekly spot of Dan has been lurking on Facebook groups and getting annoyed.
That's it. But I do see her books recommended quite often. And I'm always probably quite outspoken of like, because does she have books on runes? Am I right? Yeah, and I'm usually like, well, let's read a book by a runologist. Like, makes more sense. Do that instead. But yeah, and then I kind of caught this in the periphery that there'd been some hot water there.
Yeah,
and I didn't really know what.
It has something to do with some statements she made on a TV show. I really don't want to get into that.
Okay.
People can Google it if they feel like it.
Yeah, they can probably Google it. Yeah, but
I tried.
That's just a good example, I would say, of how anybody's head is on the chopping block as soon as you publish the book, or you're a leader of an organization or something like that. There will be people who will want to take you down, and at some point it will happen for some, right? That's definitely something that I've noticed in my what are we now, 30 years of being a member of active pagan communities, right?
Is that exclusive to pagan communities, or do you think that happens in all religions, or do you think other religions have a more unified structure, so it can't happen quite the same?
I can't really speak to that. Like I don't know how it works for other religious communities. I mean, there's some that look similar in like Christianity. But when somebody has like the title pastor, priest, or minister or something like that, there tends to be at least like a respect for that position, right? In Nordic paganism, we have gordi as a term that people use about themselves if they feel they have some kind of authority. Some people will use it about people when they feel that they have some kind of authority.
Quickly, where does that term come from?
I will get to that. Don't worry. But what I want to say is before that is that just because some dude over here calls himself Gordy, it doesn't mean I'm going to respect him as such. Like it doesn't translate between groups necessarily, which is quite fascinating. As like if you just look at it as a religious phenomenon, it's quite fascinating that just because somebody has like a title of distinction in one group doesn't mean that that person has that title of distinction among others, or that it's respected at all. Now, the term itself comes from the saga literature, medieval Iceland, right? And what we get in the saga literature is this description of Guodar. They're kind of priests of the Nordic gods in the saga literature. And then in medieval Iceland, they become, or the term is applied to anybody who holds land, which wasn't a lot of people, and therefore also holds a seat at the Alþingi, or the General Assembly in Iceland. So it, seems to start, we also know it from a couple of runic inscriptions from Scandinavia, from the Danish area in particular. It seems to start as like a religious title, and then it becomes a political title in medieval Iceland in particular. And it's probably derived from the same word as the same root as the word God, which and the word God means something you address or yell out to, or something like that. And
Mhm.
so I guess the Gordy would be the guy in charge of yelling at the rituals.
like the town crier.
The town crier. Yes.
I don't know. Do they have town
The
criers in Europe,
MC.
or is that like a British thing?
Um, I think it used to be a pretty common phenomenon.
Yeah, we still have them in some little towns. They just come out and like yell stuff.
That is a British thing, I think.
That is the British
that
thing.
they
That's still
that
there.
they're still there.
Yeah, there are definitely some. We love a tradition over here. And there are some. Yeah, there's
This is
definitely
not
some.
just an excuse to have some like crazy dude running around.
No, he comes out in like his very elegant attire, like the kind of town crier outfit. He comes out
Mhm.
and usually they're overweight. Don't know if that helps him like project more, but usually they are a little rotund.
A little bit
Um,
baritone.
Yeah, and they yell out stuff, and then
I just try to imagine that happening in like some mountainous or kind of rural towny area in Norway. And just like someone opening their window, just going like, Knut, it's a bit loud. Do you want a cup of coffee? How you doing?
yeah, yeah. So Matei, you said something interesting before about like I guess like almost a respect thing, because I'm not Christian and I'm not like Muslim, but I would hold a certain level of respect for a pastor or a priest or an imam. Like I just would naturally. I don't know where that comes from, whether that just comes from like through life, whereas like a Gaudi then probably wouldn't hold the same.
I mean, I
Margaret,
think
sorry, yeah.
I think for you, the reason that you do that, and you probably have the same respect for some temple priest in India or Thailand
Yeah,
or
for
something
sure,
like
yeah.
that, right? Yeah, that's because you've grown up in a society that you know fosters this kind of reverence for people of that type of position, right? And so you, as the person you are, you also have respect for Islam, you have respect for Hinduism, and so on. So you would recognize that same position in those traditions, right? And you probably, I'm sure if somebody, I don't know if you've ever met some heathen Gordi or something like that, but I'm sure that you would
I would have
perhaps.
respect, yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I feel like I wouldn't have the same innate kind of feeling of a, a respectful position. Margaret,
Mm.
you politely put your finger up, which was very lovely of you.
No, I was just thinking that I think it in some ways also comes back to this whole thing with uh the centuries slash millennia of tradition and practice, that regardless of whether or not you believe it, also a 100% culture and upbringing, 100%, but that also these terms and positions carry, it's not just about the person that is currently holding said position, but it's about the 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 weight kind of the historical, whether you're aware of it or not. That also colors how you've been brought up to think about it, I think. And I think I just wanted to add on a note on that specific regard, is that I am myself the daughter of two priests. So I wouldn't have existed if Norway was still a Catholic country. And first of all, my mom wouldn't have been allowed to be ordained, and second of all, couldn't have married. But I noticed that growing up, in Scandinavia, or at least in Norway particularly, we're fairly laid back about it. I feel the other countries that I've been in that have a similar kind of laid back but respectfulness are the other Scandinavian countries and the UK actually, which surprised me a little bit, but does but there's still this kind of, oh, you are now in that office, which is an official position, and regardless of whether I believe in said religion or not, I know that this religion has existed for however long, and that you are ultimately doing something that, whether or not I agree with it, has been considered to be a good for something. While at the same time, I would also have respect for if I met someone who term themselves as in a leadership or godly position of a neo-pagan Asatru community, I would still have respect, but at the same time, it doesn't have that weight, that tradition.
Yeah, it doesn't. I feel like
Does that mean, did I go off on a tangent there? Did I lose you? Or
no, you're explaining the phenomenon.
Yeah.
Now I can attach a couple of comments to that.
Quickly though, I also feel like there would be so many Viking bros that just rolled their eyes at like, oh, how can she talk about Nordic mythology when her parents are pastors? I don't know why I feel like that.
Oh, believe you me, you wouldn't be the first
thing. Oh, not me, but I guarantee there will
you
be
specifically.
so some of those fuckers who definitely were just like, see, I knew that's why I didn't like the first Asatru episode.
So there's a couple of things to consider with all of this. One, I hinted at it or got into it a little bit before, and that is that, you know, this tendency of not perceiving neo-paganism as something serious, right? The establishment in Western societies don't perceive it as something serious because it has that aura of like barbarian, and that, you know, is a long-standing tradition of a sort of, you know, undermining dissent from the common consensus in different ways. You get that, for instance, with the you know, in Scandinavia, with the religious consensus being, oh, these are Christian countries, we're Christians here. We're also kind of laid back Christians. We're not the like super oppressive type of Christians, but then again, in some ways we are, right? And with you know, religious alternatives, that's a common theme, whether it's Islam or Buddhism or New Age religions or something like that. There's a tendency in Scandinavia to be politely oppressive about them.
I'd also say it doesn't even necessarily have to be a practicing Christian that is doing the oppressing, but the culture that has been established. Yeah. So you could swear and do whatever you like, but you're still like, no, but our Christian traditions.
Yes, absolutely. It's something that, you know, most people tend to adhere to in Scandinavian countries. I would say, like, this notion that this is our culture. And that's also why I, as somebody who has not been brought up as Christian and Lutheran Christian, I can go to a Lutheran church here in the US and I know all the rituals. Like my wife's family, primarily Scandinavian Lutherans, and I went to a Scandinavian Lutheran church here with my wife, and she had no fucking clue what was going on, and I knew all of it.
Right? You were like, "Don't worry, babe, I got you."
Exactly, because, you know, that's you know, cultural upbringing in Scandinavia, right? So that's one aspect of it, like this, you know, general consensus that, oh, this is kind of silly, this is peripheral and silly. But within the communities, right, there's a difference, right? Within the pagan communities, there's a difference in the sense that I think a lot of people don't want to be governed, right? That's why they go to these new pagan communities in the first place. Like, we don't want somebody to tell us how to think and feel and believe. We want to figure that out on our own. And that's why when there's then a group that has established a consensus that this is some kind of like religious authority in our group, it doesn't necessarily translate to a religious authority in another group, or just even the respect for that person as a religious authority. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
absolutely.
It 100% does. And I also think in a Scandinavian context, we have this. I'm being very generalizing here, but we also, I find, sometimes have this. I'm going to be very academic here and use the term a hoity-toity about spiritual and or religious beliefs that we perceive to be, and I'm using air quotes here for anyone who's just listening, made up. I feel, I haven't done any sort of study on this, but just my own experience is that, for example, in Scandinavia, neo-paganism is talked about the same way that one would talk about Scientology or the
Mhm.
Mormon Church, which are all wildly different concepts, but they're perceived as being very modern constructs and therefore fictional. And
Mhm.
I'm not
Okay.
passing judgment one way or another, but
Let
that therefore also they're not deemed necessary for a certain amount of respect, is my
Mhm.
experience.
okay.
Yeah,
That
that's
I
true.
want to piggyback on this because this was going to be my next question, and I'll put my head on the chopping block a lot more than Margrethe will because I don't have a career to uphold, I guess. And I was going to ask two things, which is one in terms of how many people do you think genuinely believe the parts of the religion, or it's just they believe like the ideology of it, if that makes sense. As in, like, do they believe that the sky was actually, or the world was made from Ymir's body, and the the skull is the sky, and all these bits that you find in the Eddas, and and then to what Mags was saying, is that so far fetched that that's why a lot of people look at it maybe through like a ridicule lens, because like that's so different than like the world was made from a
Mm.
giant and all these little pieces, like, well, that's ridiculous. Whereas with Christianity it's a little bit more kind of ambiguous. It's Sky Daddy did all this stuff, and it's as amazing, it's as
You should turn
unbelievable.
that into a T-shirt. Sky Daddy did all that stuff.
It's as amazing if if it was real, but it's very ambiguous. It's just like he created all these things in 7 days, and it's not like, oh, it's this giant that we kind of tore apart into pieces and made all these bits from. Um, yeah, and I
Mhm.
wondered whether maybe that was why, because it was just so out there. And
Mhm.
the other part was like, how many people do you think do genuinely believe in that versus just like it's the principle of it.
Yeah, so I want to just go to, because this all connects in different ways. Just want to go to what Barry wrote in the chat right here, um, where they're saying that in mainstream British education, religion and faith is generally perceived as backwards, and science is preached as faith. Right, that's something that we
Mm-hmm.
see in a lot of European education in general.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it's like here in the US. What I, as somebody who teaches at college level, can see is that I get a lot of students who actually don't know much about religion at all in different ways. A common theme, for instance, is, I mean, I'm teaching about medieval Scandinavia, so Catholicism is an important religion to know about in that regard, and most of the curiosities I see around religion with some of my students are like, they don't think of Catholicism as a part of Christianity, right? That's quite fascinating to me as a European. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, that
I had the
that,
exact same experience, but as a kid when I lived there and went to high school there.
mm,
that
it's just
I had to explain
okay.
on so many occasions. I was like, wait, no.
it's so
So
surprising because for us, or certainly from my perspective as a Brit, we think of, or I think of, America still being very religious,
yeah,
and very like everybody's pretty there or
but
thereabouts.
religion, being religious does not mean that you know the history of your religion, right?
Okay, right.
No.
Okay,
Or
I'm with you.
even the basic tenets of it.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Um, right. So that's
Preach.
another uh, another important component. So okay, so this brings us back to this question that you had, like, how many people believe in this stuff, or how many people do I think believe in this stuff in these groups, pagan groups? That question is a false dichotomy, right? That comes from exactly that type of educational system that gives primacy to scientific thinking, and calls religion ridiculous, right? Essentially, right? That is the subtext of educational systems like the British and the Danish and the Norwegian, the German, the French. Um, you have a situation where religion is relegated to or religious expressions, let's say that, because there are different attitudes and different ways of handling religion in these particular educational systems. Like, for instance, in Denmark, we are taught Christianity in public school, right? That's different elsewhere, right? But religious expressions in general is relegated to like this, realm outside of the public sphere, first and foremost. And when it is then brought into the public sphere, the only religious expression that's generally accepted is Christianity. And then, sometimes Islam gets a little space as well, and maybe a couple of other traditions if they are, older types, right? Like Buddhism, for instance. Oh, it has a history, so we can kind of recognize that it's a viable religion or something like that. But these like inventions, so to speak, right? They're like, oh, it's ridiculous. It's only 100 years old or something like that. It's like, yeah, that's also the case for Christianity once, right? And by the way, Christianity was treated in a similar way when it first emerged, right? As
For
a
way
ridiculous
longer.
invention.
Yeah.
Like for centuries, as something ridiculous. And by the way, also Christianity actually has an explanation within it as an invention, right? That is what Jesus is about. That is like explaining how we're now inventing a new religion.
So here's what we're gonna do, guys.
Yeah, exactly. So keep that in mind with these things, right? So now we accept Christianity as a functional religious system, and let it take primacy. But on the flip side of that, 2,000 years ago, nobody did, and Christians were persecuted, right? And then eventually, Christianity manages to establish itself within the ranks of 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 um, government, with hierarchies, right? The elites. And that's when Christianity then, turns around and starts persecuting people. And so it's like this is what humans do, right?
Can I
They
also add it on a caveat to that? And that in that period from being something, a religious practice that was persecuted, to then becoming a religious practice that was in a dominant place of power, the religion itself or the practice itself also goes through so many cycles of uh, being altered in the way that is thought to be canon. So we're
Yeah.
talking about like, and I'm sure that is also the case for a lot of other long lined, like a lot of other religious practices that have a very long continuous history up until this day, that the religion, whether or not it's talked about, has gone through an extraordinary amount of rehashing, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things to consider with that too, when it comes like the development of Christianity, is that it kind of looks like a similar religious landscape as what we see with neo-pagans, Nordic neo-pagans in particular today. Back then, like you have a congregation of Christians over here who's hating on a congregation of Christians over there. You have a congregation of Christians over here who respect the authority of their particular pastor, but over there they don't, right? And so that seems quite similar as well. That
Actually,
might
really
tell you.
interesting. I haven't thought about it that way before, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah, they were all talking shit on each other back in Paul's time, right?
Also, yeah,
That's why he's
Paul.
writing all of these crank letters, right? He's
Oh,
like, oh, the Galatians, oh, the Corinthians, you got to hear this stuff because blah 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 blah, right? Like
drama
that's
llama. Yep.
yeah, drama llama, and that's how the New Testament is made, right? So that's important to keep in mind too. That should tell you a little bit about what's going on with these new religious movements. And then secondly, going back to what you were asking, Dan, this notion of like, well, how many people believe in what these myths are talking about as like something real? Well, that is a non-question essentially, right? Sure, there's probably somebody who believes that out there. I don't know. I mean, there are people that believe in
There are.
QAnon.
I see them in the groups of Facebook.
Yeah. And that's wild. That's really wild. But leaving that aside, I think the better question to ask is, well, what does it mean to people, right? What do these kinds of myths and creation stories and that kind of stuff mean to people? And this is where we get into the interesting stuff when we talk about religion, right? Because that will tell you a little bit about, for instance, the hierarchies that people are operating with in their minds as well. Like, where do they see themselves in the world? Who do they see themselves in relation to? How do they see themselves in relation to these particular people over here and these particular people over there? Animals and plants, water, sky, trees, mountains, and so on, right? That's where it gets interesting. And so for me personally, like, I can't speak to what people believe when they call themselves Asatru or Norse pagan or something like that. I can only speak for myself. And to me, these stories, they enable me to have a relationship to everything in my world, right? A relationship that goes deeper than, oh, there's a fucking tree. Who cares? Let's cut it down. It will be more like, there is a tree here, and what about it? What is it? What is its existence? What does it want, need, and how do I relate to it as a person, right? And so that's how I operate in my world with all of this. And so if you go back to the creation story, Ymir is like this giant from whom the gods created the world. Well, what I'm told through that creation story is that everything is alive, everything has spirit, and everything is connected, right? It all comes from one single body entity here, right? And that, goes into a lot of metaphoric stuff as well, right? When you think about it, the blood of the giant becomes the waters of the world. Okay, interesting. What does that mean? Well, it means that we should consider our blood in a similar capacity as the waters of the world. It
Just as
means,
precious, just as finite, kind of.
for instance, I mean, there are many different ways there are many different
Of course,
avenues
yeah.
we could go down with that, right? Like, just as precious, just as finite is a great way of thinking about it. You can think of it as, life-giving, which it is, right? You can think of, what we know scientifically is like how much of our bodies is composed of water. And you can think about,
Good one.
yeah, and you can think about it in terms of like, every time you drink, what are you drinking from? And then you can extrapolate on that, and then you can think about the fact that, the H2O molecules in your body might have once flowed down the Nile, or, circulated in the deep, the depths of the Pacific Ocean, right? And then now we're starting to get into some beautiful ways of thinking about things, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so to me,
you're about to break my brain once again.
Well, next level then tells you that you're part of geological forces, right? You're not separated from volcanic activities, right? The sulfur that you have in your hair comes from volcanoes once upon a time, right? Think about that for a second. Because where else would it come from? Like, that's the molecules, that's the atoms that comes from all of these different processes, geologic processes. They have entered our body, right? We're part of that. So
fucking awesome.
Yeah.
So cool.
I have no. You could just have offended me then by saying I have sulfur hair, and I'd be like, "Well, that's so cool, thanks." Ari is like, "You got fucking shit sulfur hair, you."
That it was not an attempt to defend to offend you.
I was like, "What? What's wrong with my hair? What is it all? What do you mean? It's all sulfur."
We all have right. So the salts in our body comes from deep in the earth, right? And that's what we need to realize then, right? Like, when we look at a story like this, right? This is a story that somebody came up with, the creation of the world from Emir's body. This is a story that somebody came up with to attempt to explain something for them at some point. I can use it now to attempt a similar explanation for how I relate to the world, right? And then what I can also do is that I can relate that to the scientific knowledge that we have as well, and I could combine the two, and I can see that story as a metaphor for our existence and our connectedness with the rest of existence. And then from there, I can make various ethical and moral choices about my own existence in the world. Right? What does it mean as a human being to be connected with everything else? What does it mean to see yourself as disconnected from everything else? And if you see yourself as disconnected from everything else, in my opinion, there's a higher risk that you might not care about all these things that you consider yourself disconnected from. But if you see yourself as connected to everything, there's a higher chance that you might also care about all the things that you consider yourself connected to, right? That means as an individual sitting here on a mountaintop in Colorado, I'm connected to everything around me here, which extends to connections to the rest of this continent, to continents elsewhere, to the animals that live around me, to the animals that live on the African savanna, to the animals that live in the Himalayas, and to the people, all the people around the world as well, right? And that will then also, of course, hopefully inform you about how you should treat these animals and people and trees and mountains and all the stuff, right? So
Perfect.
that's how you can use it.
There we go.
That's my personal way of thinking about it all. And if you want to hear more about that, you can always listen to the Sacred Flame podcast.
Yes.
Oh, there you go. There you go. No, yeah, definitely listen. Let's
Sorry, it's just
no,
that's just
Margaret.
so beautiful. Such a just amazing way of thinking. And I also just wanted to add a quick comment about the non-question, is that I think that is also comes from a point of, and I absolutely still met this when I was a practicing Christian myself. But I think it wouldn't surprise me if, especially people who practice neo-pagan belief systems encounter this to a far larger degree, that you are kind of judged or perceived as how enlightened you are based on how much you believe the word by word stories that your faith is founded on. So, but do you actually, like, again, Christianity is not a one-to-one comparison in any way, shape, or form, but it is a similar way of asking someone who is a practicing Christian, but do you actually believe everything the Bible says? Do you actually believe that Eve was made from Adam's rib? Like that kind of thing. It's like, well, no. But okay, the Eve from Adam's rib was a really bad example. But those stories kind of inform your way of interacting and engaging with the world, rather.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we should always keep in mind, regardless of which religious system that we're dealing with. I mean, we as contemporary human beings always have to make choices with regards to this cultural material, because there is never a one-to-one alignment between the way that we live today, how we live, who we are, and what we want, and all those things, and what these people wrote down once upon a time in the Bible or the saga literature or the Vedic literature, regardless of where we're at, right? Keep in mind, the Bible wasn't written for you. Like that's so important to consider as a modern human being. If you're Christian, the Bible wasn't written for you. It was written for the people back then, right?
Who also had a different way of speaking and interacting with the world than we do, similarly to the texts that modern Asatru are based on.
Exactly.
Things will seem weird to us today because they weren't written for us. Exactly like you said. They spoke differently. They acted differently.
Yeah. And that in the saga literature is a great example of that. If you were to apply this like idea to the saga literature that you see with the fundamentalist Christianity, right? That the word of this particular text is law, right? Then we will be doing some pretty fucked up things, guys. There's going to be a lot of blood feuds out there, and who would want that? Like, if
But
you
like,
want
why
that, you're
though? It takes so
crazy.
much effort.
That's another thing. It takes too much effort too, right? And so that should tell you a little bit about the other fundamentalist approaches that you find out there. Like, if people want to bring that stuff back, so to speak, or reenact it in modern times, there's something wrong. Like, this is something wrong. We have so much historical knowledge to tell us just how bad of an idea that is. But yeah, I'll get off my soapbox now about
No,
that.
no.
No need. I'm good.
Perfect. Yeah, no, let's wrap this up because I want to give the patrons a chance to ask you a few questions.
Sorry,
before we
Dan.
have to- No, I know Matthias is on a time limit.
Of course.
So I want to give the patrons a chance to ask him some questions. They've missed him. Of course they have. So
Yeah,
there'll be some
I
questions.
missed you guys.
Okay, save miss me.
I've missed you, Dan.
I am also just sitting here having so much fun having an actual conversation with you two and not just being a listener in my car to previous episodes. I'm like, oh no, this is happening right now with both of you.
I know it's fun. We get on. Yeah, let's wrap this up and then let's let the patrons ask some questions. So if anybody listening does want to hear more of this discussion, then it's just patreon.com/Nordic Mythology podcast. Like I say, it starts from £3 a month, 10p a day ish. And you can get all those bonus episodes, but you're going to get an extension of this and all the questions that people are going to ask Matthias. So yeah,
And can I just before we go to the questions,
of course,
just make a quick pitch, because like, aside from the Sacred Flame podcast, where it's like basically just like my own philosophical musings in different ways, I'm also starting up a new project with the head steward of the Troth, Lonnie Scott. He is also the guy behind the Weird Web Radio. He and I are going to do a strictly heathen podcast where we talk about all things heathen. It's going to be called A Heathen Thing. Double meaning there. Yeah. Yeah, so we're starting that up sometime soon, and anybody who is interested in hearing more about all this stuff is welcome to tune into that. So I figured this would be a good place to pitch that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, wonderful. I look forward to listening.
Yeah.
There we go. Is there anything else you need to shout out?
I think that would be it for now.
Perfect.
Oh, I want to shout out the book that's relevant for this specific episode. What was it? Asatru for Beginners by Mathias Nordvig?
Yes. Yeah. And Dan, you have it on yourselves, you say?
I do. Yeah. It's on the website. It's got one up there somewhere, but I can't reach it right now. That could also be a lie. Might not even have one there.
Save yourself there.
But who knows?
I do. Margrethe, where can people find you?
It is on Instagram as usual, Archeomax, Archeo with a K.
Matthias, where can people find you as well?
You can find me on Instagram as well. Just my name, Mathias Nordvig. You can also look at my website, mathiasnordvig.com, and find interesting things that I do, including a retreat in Vermont in September. If you're in the US,
swanky.
and you wanna, it's a thing. So go check out my website. That's just mathiasnordvig.com, MATHIASNORDVIG.com.
Is this a retreat with you?
That's the retreat with me and also Jakob Lund, the drummer from Heilung, or one of the drummers from Heilung. We're doing a whole thing.
Oh, nice.
Is it going to be like a thing? Or just
it's actually
thing?
called it's actually called Thrimskaper Thing. So it's going to be a thing.
Hey.
Oh, nice. Oh, can I come? I want to come.
Yeah, you can come. Yeah.
want to come join in.
Yeah.
Nice.
Come join us.
Oh,
Look
that'd
how
be fun.
excited Dan is at this
And,
prospect.
like a little kid again. Perfect. If you want to follow me, it's Daniel_Ireland1, or still haven't got that one off the name, Matthias. Still there. Someone's still got it.
I'm sorry, man.
I know. I want it. Or the business at Horns of Odin, and then obviously it's Nordic Mythology podcast on all the different channels. Yeah, let's let the patrons ask you some questions.